The year 1888, a year that would be forever etched in the annals of history. A chill settled over London, a city already shrouded in the mists of uncertainty and fear. It started in the East End, a place already grappling with poverty and despair. The streets were filled with the cries of the destitute, the air thick with hopelessness. But this fear was different. It was a palpable, almost tangible dread that seeped into the very bones of the city. It was the fear of an unseen predator, a nightmare cloaked in shadow, a figure that moved silently, striking terror into the hearts of all who dared to walk the streets at night. His name was Jack the Ripper, a name that would become synonymous with terror and mystery. He haunted the fog-choked alleys, leaving a trail of blood and terror in his wake, each murder more gruesome than the last, each victim a testament to his brutality. 5 women, their lives tragically intertwined, became his victims. Their stories, lives cut short by a merciless hand, are remembered with sorrow and horror. Their stories, forever etched in the annals of crime, continue to fascinate and horrify to this day. Each detail, each clue, a piece of a puzzle that remains unsolved. The Ripper's reign was short, brutally efficient. In a matter of months, he had carved his name into the history of crime. He moved like a phantom, appearing and disappearing into the labyrinthine streets. The alleys of Whitechapel became his hunting ground, a maze where he was the master. His knowledge of anatomy, coupled with the savage nature of the murders, hinted at a mind consumed by darkness, a mind that understood the human body in ways that were both clinical and horrifying. Was he a doctor, a butcher, a madman driven by some unknown force? Theories abounded, each more chilling than the last. The questions lingered unanswered, echoing through the decades, each theory, each suspect adding another layer to the enigma. The name Jack the Ripper has become synonymous with unsolved horror, a symbol of the unknown, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the human soul. His crimes transcended the boundaries of time, captivating the minds of criminologists, historians, and armchair detectives alike. Each new generation drawn to the mystery, each new theory adding to the legend. The mystery of his identity, the chilling brutality of his crimes, and the chilling silence that followed continue to grip our collective imagination. The streets of Victorian London, once filled with fear, now echo with the whispers of his legend. This is the story of Jack the Ripper, a tale of fear, mystery, and the darkness that can lurk in the heart of a city. A story that reminds us of the thin line between civilization and chaos, and the shadows that can hide within us all. To understand the Ripper's reign of terror, we must first journey back to the heart of Victorian London. Imagine a city of stark and vivid contrasts. Opulence and poverty existed side by side, often just streets apart. Gaslight illuminated grand avenues, while the East End languished in squalor and neglect. Whitechapel, the epicenter of the Ripper's crimes, was a place forgotten by time and privilege, a world apart.
The streets teemed with life, a chaotic blend of humanity and activity. Costermongers hawked their wares, their cries echoing through the narrow, winding alleys. Drunks stumbled from pubs, seeking solace in cheap gin and fleeting moments of escape. And amidst this throng walked the women who would tragically become the Ripper's prey. They were the forgotten souls of Whitechapel, driven to the streets by poverty, desperation, and misfortune. Life for these women was a constant, unending struggle for survival. Many turned to prostitution, a perilous profession that offered little reward and carried immense risk. They lived on the fringes of society, ignored and ostracized by the world around them. Their lives were cheap, their deaths even cheaper, often unnoticed.
It was in this environment, a breeding ground for despair and anonymity, that Jack the Ripper stalked his victims. The darkness of Whitechapel, both literal and metaphorical, provided the perfect cover for his gruesome deeds. The fog-shrouded streets became his hunting ground, the shadows his silent accomplices. The Ripper's victims were not just names on a police report, they were real people, each with their own unique stories, struggles, and aspirations. Their lives, though often overshadowed by the gruesome nature of their deaths, were filled with moments of joy, sorrow, and resilience. They were women with lives, loves, and dreams, however tattered and worn. Each one faced the harsh realities of Victorian London, a time and place where survival was a daily battle. Their dreams, though often modest, were no less significant. They hoped for better days, for a chance to escape the grinding poverty and relentless hardships that defined their existence. Their stories, tragically cut short, provide a glimpse into the harsh realities of life in Whitechapel. This was a district teeming with life, yet fraught with danger. The narrow, winding streets were home to a vibrant community, but also a breeding ground for crime and despair. The women who lived here navigated a world where every day was a struggle for survival. Though history remembers them as victims, it is important to remember their humanity. They were more than just casualties of a notorious killer. They were mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends. Their lives, though marked by tragedy, were also filled with moments of love, laughter, and hope. It is this humanity that we must strive to remember and honor.
Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly, was the first to fall prey to the Ripper's blade. Born into a working-class family, Polly's life was a series of hardships. She married young, but her marriage fell apart, leaving her to fend for herself in a harsh and unforgiving world. Trapped in a cycle of poverty and alcoholism, she resorted to prostitution to survive. It was a desperate measure, but one that many women in her position were forced to take. Despite her circumstances, Polly was known to be a kind and gentle soul, always willing to help those in need. Her mutilated body, discovered in Bucks Row, sent shockwaves through Whitechapel. The brutality of her murder was unlike anything the community had seen before. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, and it left the residents of Whitechapel in a state of fear and uncertainty. The brutality of the crime was shocking, even in a place accustomed to violence. Whitechapel was no stranger to crime, but the savagery of Polly's murder was unprecedented. It marked the beginning of a reign of terror that would haunt the district for months to come.
Annie Chapman, a woman worn down by life's hardships, was the next victim. Like Polly, Annie's life was marked by struggle and adversity. She had once been married and had children, but her husband's death left her destitute. She turned to alcohol to cope with her grief, and her life spiraled into a cycle of poverty and despair. Found murdered in Hanbury Street, her death amplified the growing fear that gripped Whitechapel. The community was already on edge after Polly's murder, and Annie's death only heightened their sense of vulnerability. The Ripper's presence was no longer a distant threat. It was a very real and immediate danger. The Ripper was no longer a shadow. He was a very real threat, lurking in the darkness. The residents of Whitechapel lived in constant fear, knowing that the killer could strike at any moment. The once bustling streets became eerily quiet as people stayed indoors, too afraid to venture out after dark.
Elizabeth Stride, a Swedish immigrant, met her end on the night of the double event. Elizabeth, known as Long Liz, had come to London in search of a better life. She had dreams of escaping the poverty of her homeland, but instead found herself trapped in a cycle of hardship and exploitation. Her throat was slashed, but unlike the previous victims, her body remained relatively unharmed. This deviation from the Ripper's usual modus operandi puzzled investigators. Some speculated that the killer had been interrupted, while others believed it was a deliberate change in his pattern. Was she interrupted, or was this a sign of the Ripper's evolving modus operandi? The question remains unanswered, adding another layer of mystery to the already perplexing case. Elizabeth's death, though less brutal than the others, was no less tragic. She was a woman who had sought a better life, only to meet a violent end.
Catherine Eddowes, murdered just hours after Stride, bore the full brunt of the Ripper's savagery. Catherine, known as Kate, was a spirited woman with a quick wit and a sharp tongue. She had faced many challenges in her life, but always managed to maintain a sense of humor and resilience. Her mutilated body, discovered in Mitre Square, served as a chilling reminder of the killer's depravity. The extent of the violence inflicted upon her was shocking, even by the Ripper's standards. It was a clear indication that the killer's bloodlust was escalating and that no one was safe. The audacity of the crime, committed in a public space, sent a wave of terror through London. The fact that the Ripper had struck in such a visible location showed that he was becoming bolder and more confident. The entire city was gripped by fear, and the authorities were under immense pressure to catch the killer.
Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest of the victims, suffered the most horrific fate. Mary Jane, known as Marie Jeanette, was a vivacious and attractive woman who had dreams of a better future. She had come to London with hopes of finding success, but instead found herself ensnared in the same cycle of poverty and exploitation that had claimed the lives of so many others. Her mutilated body, discovered in her own room, spoke volumes of the Ripper's brutality. The level of violence inflicted upon her was unprecedented, even by the Ripper's standards. It was a clear indication that the killer's rage and bloodlust were reaching new heights. The level of violence inflicted upon her suggested a personal vendetta, but the motive, like so much else, remained shrouded in mystery. Mary Jane's death was the most brutal of all the Ripper's victims, and it left the community in a state of shock and horror. The mystery of the Ripper's identity and motives only deepened, leaving everyone to wonder who would be next.
These 5 women, forever linked by tragedy, became the tragic face of the Whitechapel murders. Their lives, though marked by hardship and struggle, were also filled with moments of joy, love, and hope. They were more than just victims. They were individuals with their own unique stories and dreams. Their stories serve as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of the marginalized and the darkness that can lurk in the shadows of society. The Whitechapel murders were not just a series of brutal crimes, they were a reflection of the social and economic conditions that left so many people vulnerable and desperate. It is a reminder that behind every statistic and headline, there are real people with real lives, and their stories deserve to be remembered and honored. As the body count rose, so too did the pressure on the police to catch the Whitechapel murderer. The streets of Whitechapel were filled with an air of dread, and the newspapers were relentless in their coverage, amplifying the public's fear and the urgency for a resolution. The investigation, hampered by limited resources and the fog of fear that enveloped the city, became a race against time. The police force, already stretched thin, found themselves in a desperate struggle to piece together the puzzle before the killer struck again. Every clue, every whisper was meticulously examined. But the killer remained one step ahead. Detectives worked tirelessly, often through the night, sifting through evidence and following up on leads that frequently led to dead ends.
The police employed every tool at their disposal, from door-to-door inquiries to the newly emerging field of forensic science. They knocked on countless doors, hoping to find a witness who had seen something, anything, that could break the case wide open. Fingerprinting was in its infancy, and blood typing was yet to be discovered. The tools available to the police were rudimentary at best, and they had to rely heavily on their instincts and experience. The lack of sophisticated forensic techniques made identifying the killer incredibly challenging. Each crime scene presented a frustrating array of clues that seemed to lead nowhere, and the police were often left feeling helpless. The investigation was further hampered by the sheer volume of information, much of it contradictory or unreliable. Detectives were inundated with tips and theories, many of which were based on little more than hearsay and speculation. The East End, a hotbed of gossip and rumour, proved a fertile ground for speculation. Every day brought new stories and potential suspects, but separating fact from fiction was a monumental task. Every pub conversation, every street corner exchange yielded a new theory, a new suspect. The public's imagination ran wild, and the police had to sift through a mountain of misinformation to find the truth.
Despite the challenges, the police investigated every lead, however improbable. They left no stone unturned, driven by the hope that the next clue might be the one to finally unmask the killer. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses, searched countless lodgings, and even resorted to undercover operations. Officers went undercover, blending into the seedy underbelly of Whitechapel in an attempt to gather intelligence. The pressure to catch the killer mounted with each passing day, as the public's fear turned to anger and frustration. Demonstrations and public outcries became common, with citizens demanding justice and safety. The investigation into the Whitechapel murders was a baptism by fire for the fledgling field of criminal investigation. It tested the limits of the police force and pushed them to innovate and adapt in ways they had never before imagined. It exposed the limitations of the police force and highlighted the need for more sophisticated methods of crime solving. The challenges they faced underscored the importance of developing better forensic techniques and investigative strategies. Though the Ripper was never caught, the investigation laid the groundwork for modern criminal profiling and forensic science. The lessons learned from this dark chapter in history would go on to shape the future of law enforcement, paving the way for the advanced techniques we rely on today.